A millionaire haunted by the disappearance of his daughter 15 years ago finds a young woman with a pendant identical to the one he gave her. But when he tries to discover the truth, he is faced with a secret that could change everything. Is she the one he has been searching for, or just an illusion that will destroy him? Ricardo walks slowly through the park, a temporary refuge from the immense loneliness that seemed to envelop his life. He was a successful man, a businessman whose name resonated in the highest circles. But inside him, he carried an open wound that never healed. 15 years had passed since the disappearance of his daughter, Lara, and every day that dawned without answers was a reminder of his loss. The park, with its bustle of families, joggers, and children's laughter, was a sharp contrast to the silence that dominated his home. He sat on a bench under the shade of an old oak tree and watched the people pass by. Every face seemed like a possibility. Every little girl running after a ball sparked a painful memory. His mind kept returning to the day Lara disappeared, a sunny afternoon like that one, full of promise that ended in despair. The leaves fell slowly, swaying in a gentle breeze, and Ricardo wondered if he would ever stop looking for her, if he could accept the possibility that he would never see her again. But how does one abandon a child? The thought was inconceivable. In the distance, the sound of a bicycle screeching against the asphalt caught his attention. A young woman pedaled past, her laughter echoing through the trees. Ricardo tried to focus on the present, on what was in front of him, but it was like asking a river to stop flowing. Memories always found a way to drag him back. As he continued his walk, he passed a small makeshift lemonade stand. A group of children crowded around, holding coins while a young girl served them with a friendly smile. The scene was simple, almost mundane, but something about it caught Ricardo's attention. He paused for a moment, watching out of the corner of his eye as his heart tightened, as if he sensed that this peaceful stroll would soon change its course. With his hands in his pockets and his gaze lost in the dry leaves on the ground, Ricardo continued walking. Despite the persistent pain, that park offered a brief respite, a place where the shadows of his past did not seem so threatening. But that tranquility was fragile, and a part of him knew it. Ricardo continued walking through the park, trying to hold on to the calm that the surroundings seemed to offer him. However, his attention kept returning to the small lemonade stand. Something about the young woman serving him had intrigued him. It wasn't just her smile or the natural way she interacted with the children. There was something else, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. He approached with a slow, almost hesitant step. From a distance, he could observe her in more detail. Brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail, simple clothes, and a concentrated look as she counted the customers' coins. At first glance, she didn't seem any different from any other teenager, but a flash around her neck made him stop dead. Translated from Spanish to English, www.onlinedoctranslator.com, the pendant. Ricardo felt the world stop for a moment. Hanging from a thin silver chain, a small pendant shone in the sun. Its shape was unmistakable, a delicate heart with a tiny inscription, almost invisible to those who didn't know how to look for it. Lara, the engraving said, a unique piece that he himself had commissioned years ago for his daughter. The air seemed to grow thick, and her mind filled with questions. How was this possible? How could this young woman carry something so intimately tied to her missing daughter? He stood watching her in silence, struggling to contain a wave of emotions. Hope, buried for years under the weight of resignation, was beginning to resurface with an almost painful force. But there was also fear of getting closer, of breaking the fragile balance of that moment, of discovering that it was nothing more than a cruel coincidence. The young woman looked up and noticed him watching her. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There was something in her expression that disconcerted him, a mixture of innocence and a slight distrust, as if she was used to being watched in this way. Ricardo immediately looked away, feigning interest in a group of children playing nearby. He decided to approach the stand, more to confirm what he had already seen than to buy anything. Upon arriving, the young woman greeted him with a polite, "Good morning," while offering a glass of lemonade to a previous customer. Ricardo noticed the chain more clearly now, and the inscription he knew so well seemed to shine as a reminder. "How much is a glass?" or she asked, trying to keep her voice calm, even though her heart was pounding. €1, she replied with a brief but cordial smile. Ricardo reached into his pocket, though he wasn't really interested in the lemonade. When he handed her the money, his eyes fell back on the pendant. The young woman, noticing his interest, instinctively covered it with her hand, as if protecting something valuable. "It's a nice pendant," Ricardo commented, trying to sound casual. "Thank you," she replied curtly, looking away at the next customer. That little interaction was enough for Ricardo to understand that he had to be careful. There was something that made her protect that pendant, and his instinct told him that it would not be easy to get answers. She walked away from the stand with the glass of lemonade in her hand, but her thoughts were far from that soft drink. With each step she took, she felt her mind spin around what she had just discovered. For the first time in years, a spark of hope lit up inside her, but she also knew that this would be a difficult search. Something inside him told him that the pendant was not there by chance. Ricardo couldn't get the pendant he had seen around the young woman's neck out of his head. As he walked through the park, his mind was racing, trying to find a way to approach her without raising suspicion. He couldn't just show up and demand answers. He had to act with caution. There was something in the girl's attitude, a latent distrust that made him walk cautiously. He returned to the lemonade stand, this time feigning a more genuine interest in the place. There were fewer people than before, giving him a chance to talk to the young woman without interruptions. She, busy cleaning glasses and sorting coins into a small box, barely noticed his presence until Ricardo cleared his throat. "How are sales going today?" he asked with a friendly smile, trying to break the ice. The young woman looked up and recognized him immediately. Her expression hardened slightly, although she tried to remain polite. "Fine, thank you," he replied briefly, without paying much attention to it. "It's a good place to sell," Ricardo continued, pointing out the constant movement in the park. "A lot of people come here." She nodded but said nothing more. Her posture remained reserved, and her eyes seemed to analyze every word he said. Ricardo sensed the barrier, but decided to press on carefully. "You know, that pendant you're wearing is very pretty," he commented, directing his gaze towards the pendant hanging from her neck. The young woman took a step back, as if the mention of the jewel had set off an internal alarm. Instinctively, she brought a hand to the pendant, partially covering it. "Thank you," she said dryly, avoiding looking directly at him. "Sorry if I'm being indiscreet," Ricardo continued, trying to sound casual. "But it reminded me of something someone close to me used to have. Is it a gift?" The young woman's body tensed, and for a second she seemed to debate whether to answer or end the conversation. Finally, she looked up, her eyes shining with a mixture of wariness and defiance. "Yes, it's a gift. I've had it since I was little," she replied in a tone that made it clear she wasn't interested in continuing the subject. Ricardo nodded slowly, realizing that any attempt to dig deeper would be in vain for the moment. He decided not to press any further. He had obtained important information, although not enough. "It's special then. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable," he said with a conciliatory smile before taking a step back. "I wish you luck with the sales." The young woman didn't answer, but her eyes followed him as he walked away. Ricardo felt the weight of her gaze on his back, and that only confirmed what he already suspected. There was something she didn't want to reveal. Arriving at a nearby bench, Ricardo sat down and watched from a distance. The young woman continued to tend to her position, but now she seemed more restless, as if she were aware that she was being watched. Ricardo took a deep breath. He knew his next move had to be calculated. He had found a connection, however tenuous, to the past that tormented him so much, and he was determined not to let it slip away. Ricardo watched from a distance, analyzing the young woman's every move while trying to decipher the emotions behind her distrustful gaze. His intuition told him that it was not a simple coincidence that he had found that pendant on that girl's neck, but he also understood that he could not rush. However, before he could work out his next move, a figure appeared next to the lemonade stand. She was a middle-aged woman with dark hair and a stern expression who seemed to have a close relationship with the young woman. Her attitude was protective, almost motherly, as she spoke to her in a low voice. Ricardo noticed that the young woman was looking in his direction, subtly pointing to where he was sitting. The woman, who he would later identify as Mariana, turned her head slowly, her eyes assessing Ricardo with an intensity that made him feel like an intruder. Her rigid posture and the way she stood between him and the young woman made it clear that she was ready to protect her if necessary. Ricardo got up from the bench and walked over to the counter, ready to try a more direct approach. When he arrived, Mariana was already standing in front of the counter, like a barrier impossible to cross. "Good afternoon," said Ricardo in a cordial tone, trying to maintain a friendly attitude. "Good afternoon," Mariana responded, her voice firm and without a trace of cordiality. Ricardo noticed how the young woman stood behind her, silent, avoiding eye contact. Mariana, on the other hand, did not take her eyes off him, analyzing each of his movements. "I just wanted to congratulate you on the initiative of the stand. It's a good idea for a day like today." Ricardo tried, looking for a neutral topic to break the ice. "Thank you," Mariana replied curtly. Her tone seemed more like a boundary than an invitation to continue talking. Ricardo decided to take a little more risk. "Is she your daughter?" he asked, pointing towards the young woman. Mariana frowned slightly and her posture became even more defensive. "He's someone I care for. Why do you ask?" His answer was direct, and there was a hint of warning in his voice. Ricardo raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be indiscreet. It's just that you reminded me of someone very important to me." Mariana didn't respond immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on him, as if trying to determine his true intentions. Finally, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "Look, sir," she began, her tone firm but polite. "I don't know what you're looking for, but I'd appreciate it if you'd leave us alone." Ricardo felt his heart tighten, but he understood that insisting at that moment would only make things worse. "You're right. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It was a pleasure meeting you," he said with a slight smile before stepping back. As he walked away, he could feel Mariana's eyes following him. There was something about her, a mixture of caution and determination, that made him understand that it would not be easy to approach the young woman without first confronting the woman. However, Ricardo's curiosity and hope only grew. There were too many coincidences, and he was willing to investigate further, even if it meant challenging the barriers Mariana had clearly put up to protect the young girl. Back at home, Ricardo plopped down on his living room couch, his mind consumed by images of the park. The pieces didn't quite fit together, but the connection between the pendant, the young girl, and the woman who protected her was too strong to ignore. He felt like he was one step away from discovering something important, but he also knew he was facing a wall of silence that he couldn't break down on his own. After several minutes of reflection, he decided to take a bolder step. He picked up his phone and called an old acquaintance, one of the best private investigators in the city. "I need you to find information about two people," Ricardo said directly when the call was answered. The detective, an experienced man named Vargas, listened intently as Ricardo described the young woman and Mariana. He gave details about the park, the lemonade stand, and the pendant, emphasizing the importance of getting answers discreetly. "I want to know everything you can about them, who they are, where they come from, and anything that will help me understand why that girl is wearing a pendant identical to my daughter's." "Understood, Ricardo. I'll get started right away," Vargas replied with his usual confidence. After hanging up, Ricardo felt a mix of relief and anxiety. He knew this step could bring him answers, but he also feared what he might discover. He had spent 15 years dealing with a constant emptiness, and although the hope of finding Laura still sustained him, he had also learned to fear the possibility that the truth could be devastating. The days that followed were tense. Ricardo tried to continue with his routine, but each minute seemed to drag on as he waited for news from the detective. He avoided returning to the park, fearing to draw more attention to Mariana and the young woman. However, he couldn't help but imagine what their lives would be like if there really was a connection between them and his lost daughter. On several occasions, Ricardo found himself looking at the original pendant that he still had. He had kept it in a box along with other memories of Lara, objects that he had not been able to throw away even in the darkest moments of his grief. Finally, one afternoon, Vargas called him to report that he had the first results of the investigation. "I found something interesting about the woman, Mariana," Vargas began. "She has a clean record, No legal problems or worrying background. However, she seems to lead a very reserved life. According to the records, she started working as a caregiver several years ago, and the young woman who accompanies her, Sophia, has been under her guardianship for quite some time. Ricardo held his breath upon hearing the young woman's name. Sophia? He repeated, as if he needed to confirm that that detail was real. Yes, there are no clear records of her biological family. According to Mariana, she found her when she was very young. There is no information about her parents, nor birth certificates available. It is as if the girl appeared out of nowhere. Ricardo's heart was pounding. This wasn't definitive proof, but the inconsistencies in Sophia's story only increased his suspicions. Keep investigating, Vargas. I need more information, Ricardo asked, his voice full of determination. I will, but be patient. This may take time, the detective warned before taking his leave. Ricardo hung up and stared out the window, lost in his thoughts. Something inside him told him he was on the right path. Although the days ahead promised to be difficult, his hope, which had lain dormant for years, now shone with renewed intensity. The days passed slowly as Ricardo waited for news from Vargas. Each call from the detective filled his heart with anxiety and hope, as if he were about to open a door that would connect him directly to the past. Finally, one morning, the phone rang. Ricardo answered instantly, his voice tense but expectant. I have more information about Sophia, Vargas announced from the other end of the line. Ricardo sat on the edge of his chair, gripping the phone tightly. Tell me, what did you find? Mariana's story about Sophia has too many gaps. According to her, she found the girl several years ago in a rather precarious situation, but there are no official records to confirm this. No birth certificate, no documents indicating where she could have come from. It's as if Sophia didn't exist before she met Mariana. Ricardo felt his mind begin to process each word. The pieces continued to fall apart, but this new information strengthened his suspicions. And Mariana? He asked. Her record is impeccable, but she has no close family or a wide social circle. Everything indicates that she lives practically dedicated to Sophia. But there is something curious. Although she is legally registered as her guardian, there is no evidence that she has started a formal adoption process. It is as if she were protecting her under the radar of the authorities. Ricardo nodded silently, feeling that the answers were closer, but still out of reach. Is there anything else? He finally asked. Yes. I checked the few details about Sophia's childhood that Mariana has shared with her acquaintances. She is described as a reserved child who did not talk much about her past. It seems that even Sophia knows little about who she really is. These words echoed in Ricardo's mind. For years, he had imagined what it would be like to meet Lara again, but he never considered that she might have forgotten who he was. What do you suggest I do? Ricardo asked, searching for clear direction amid his growing confusion. Keep watching them, but don't push them. Sometimes people who keep secrets end up revealing them when they least expect it. As for me, I'll keep looking for more clues. This isn't over yet. After hanging up the phone, Ricardo stared at the pendant he still had on his desk, the same one he had given Lara when she turned 7. The doubts were still overwhelming, but there was also the possibility that all this would lead him to a discovery he had been waiting for 15 years. He decided to return to the park the next day, this time without getting too close. He wanted to observe Sophia and Mariana, understand their dynamic, find any detail that could confirm or dismiss his suspicions. When he arrived, he found them in the same place, tending their lemonade stand. The routine seemed calm, but Ricardo noticed something new. Sophia seemed more restless, as if something was disturbing her. Mariana, on the other hand, maintained her firm and vigilant posture, as if she could sense that someone was watching them. Ricardo decided not to approach this time. He stayed at a distance, studying each interaction between the two. The more he observed them, the more convinced he became that there was a hidden truth in their lives, a truth that, for better or worse, he was determined to discover. Ricardo's determination peaked. The time had come to confront Mariana head-on. Uncertainty consumed him, and the clues he had gathered pointed to a connection he could no longer ignore. The next day he returned to the park, this time with no intention of remaining a distant observer. When he arrived, then the lemonade stand was in its usual place. Sophia was serving the few customers who passed by, while Mariana, as always, remained nearby, alert. Ricardo took a deep breath before approaching. "Good afternoon," he greeted, addressing Mariana directly. The woman recognized him immediately, and her hardened expression left no doubt. She was not happy to see him. "Good afternoon. Do you need anything?" he asked in a curt tone. "Yes, I need to talk to you." "It's important," Ricardo said, his voice firm but calm. Mariana frowned but nodded after a moment. She looked at Sophia and motioned for her to take over the position. The young woman looked like she wanted to protest but eventually complied, though her gaze remained fixed on them as they walked a few steps away. "What do you want to talk about?" Mariana asked, crossing her arms in front of her. Ricardo took a breath before answering. "It's about Sophia. I think there may be a connection between her and my missing daughter." The words hung in the air like an echo. Mariana blinked, visibly surprised, but quickly returned to her defensive expression. "I don't understand what you're talking about," he said coldly. "Please don't lie to me," Ricardo pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. "The pendant Sophia is wearing is identical to one I gave to my daughter years ago. And I know you found her when she was very young, with no records of her family." Mariana's face hardened even further. She seemed to be torn between the need to protect Sophia and the weight of Ricardo's words. "I found her," he finally admitted, though his tone was cautious. "She was alone in conditions you can't imagine. I have cared for her ever since, as if she were my own daughter." "So you know she's not your biological daughter?" Ricardo insisted, taking a step towards her. "Please, if there is anything that can help me confirm if Sophia is my daughter, I need to know." Mariana looked down for a moment. Her rigid posture began to crumble, and when she spoke again, her voice was tinged with sadness. "I don't know anything about her real parents. I found her at a bus station, dirty, barefoot, and terrified. No one claimed her. No one asked for her. What did she want me to do? Leave her there?" Ricardo felt a lump in his throat as he imagined that scene. For a moment, the anger and frustration vanished, replaced by a deep gratitude towards Mariana for taking care of Sophia. "I'm not here to judge her," Ricardo said softly. "I just want to know the truth. If there's a chance Sophia is my daughter, we need to find out." Mariana looked at him with tired eyes, as if she had carried this burden for too long. "If you insist on seeking answers, do so carefully. Sophia knows nothing about your past, and I don't want you to hurt her with hopes that might not be true." Ricardo nodded, understanding Mariana's concerns. Although his mind was filled with questions, he also knew he had to proceed with caution. This was not only his pain, but also that of Sophia, a young girl who could face a devastating truth. As he walked away from the park, Ricardo felt like he had taken an important step. Although the conversation with Mariana did not solve all the mysteries, it had opened a door. The truth seemed closer than ever, although he knew the path would be complicated. Sophia watched from a distance as Mariana and the mysterious man spoke in low voices, their tense expressions filling her with uncertainty. Even though Mariana had asked her to stay behind to man the stall, she couldn't help but feel that something important was happening, something that somehow involved her. When Mariana returned, her face reflected a tiredness that Sophia did not recognize. The young woman tried to act as if nothing bothered her, but her curiosity was stronger. "Who was that man?" he asked, trying to sound casual as he arranged the glasses on the stand. Mariana hesitated for a moment, but then responded calmly. "Just someone who asked unnecessary questions." "Don't worry about him." Sophia frowned, feeling that Mariana was hiding something from her. She had spent too many years trusting her, but at that moment, a shadow of doubt began to grow in her mind. That night, as they had dinner together in their small apartment, Sophia couldn't contain herself any longer. "What did that man want?" he asked directly, putting the cutlery aside. Mariana sighed deeply, knowing she couldn't avoid the conversation. "Sophia, he thinks he might know you, that maybe he has a connection with you from before we met." Sophia's heart pounded. Mariana's words were ambiguous, but the message was clear. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "What does 'before we met' mean?" Mariana looked down, her voice filled with a sadness Sophia had never heard before. I'm not your biological mother, Sophia. I found you when you were little, lost and scared. I don't know anything about your family, only that no one was looking for you. Sophia felt as if her world was crumbling around her. For years, she had assumed that her life with Mariana, however modest, was all she had. Now that security was fading away, leaving in its place a terrifying emptiness. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "I wanted to protect you," Mariana answered sincerely. "I didn't want you to be burdened with unanswered questions or to live thinking about what could have been." Sophia stood up from the table, unable to process what she had just heard. Every memory she had with Mariana now felt different, as if she was watching her life from the outside. "And that man?" he persisted, his tone now colder. "Why do you think you know me?" "She says she lost her daughter many years ago, and she thinks it could be you," Mariana replied, her eyes filled with concern. "But Sophia, I don't want you to get your hopes up. We don't know if it's true, and I don't want you to get hurt." Sophia couldn't answer. Emotions overwhelmed her: confusion, anger, sadness, but also a spark of hope she couldn't ignore. What if the man was right? What if there was a bigger truth waiting to be discovered? That night, Sophia locked herself in her room, going over everything she had learned. She felt a deep emptiness and a sense of betrayal, but also a desire to know who she really was. Although she feared what she might find, she knew she couldn't continue living with unanswered questions. Sophia spent the next few days in a whirlwind of emotions. Mariana's revelation had changed everything she thought she knew about her life. Every time she tried to concentrate on her daily tasks, her mind returned to the words of that night. Who was he really? What if that man was right? The young woman avoided discussing the subject with Mariana. She knew that the woman who had cared for her for years was as distraught as she was, but she could not ignore the growing desire to seek answers. However, she feared the impact that the truth could have on her relationship with Mariana, who had been her refuge and only family. One afternoon, while she was tending the lemonade stand, she saw Ricardo approaching again. This time his steps were slower, his expression softer. Sophia looked at him, her heart racing. There was something in the way he looked at her, a mixture of hope and sadness that unsettled her deeply. "Hello, Sophia," Ricardo greeted in a voice that tried to be calm. She nodded, unable to answer. Ricardo took a moment before continuing. "I know this must be very confusing for you. I don't want to hurt you, but I think we might have a connection. Something important." Sophia felt her throat close up. Ricardo's words were full of sincerity, but they were also overwhelming. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked in a tone that was a mix of distrust and curiosity. Ricardo took a deep breath before answering. "I just want to know the truth. There is a way to confirm it, but the decision is yours." Sophia looked at him with narrowed eyes. "As? A DNA test," Ricardo replied, keeping his gaze fixed on her. "If you agree, we can do the test and confirm if you are my daughter, but I'm not going to force you. This is completely up to you." Sophia felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. The proposal was direct, almost cold, but behind those words was a promise of answers that could change everything. "What if I'm not who you think I am?" he asked quietly. "Then at least we'll know the truth, and we'll both be able to move on," Ricardo replied with a calm that hid his anxiety. "But if it turns out that you are, I want you to know that I never stopped looking for you." Sophia looked away, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Ricardo's words resonated deeply, awakening a longing she didn't even know she had. That night at home, Sophia shared the proposal with Mariana. The reaction was immediate. "Sophia, you don't have to do this," Mariana said, her voice firm but shaky. "He could be wrong. I don't want you to get hurt." "But what if he's right?" Sophia replied, her voice full of doubt. "Don't I deserve to know who I am?" Mariana sighed deeply, unable to answer. She knew that whatever decisions Sophia made would change their lives forever. After hours of silent reflection, Sophia made a decision. The next day, she returned to the park and found Ricardo waiting for her. "I will," he said, his voice firm but nervous. "Let's try it." Ricardo felt his heart pounding, a mixture of hope and fear. He had finally taken the first step toward the truth, but he knew the path would still be uncertain. The day the DNA test results came back, Ricardo could barely sleep. For weeks, his life had revolved around that possibility, that hope that kept him on the edge between fear and excitement. When he opened the envelope, his hands shook. He read the words that would change his life. Positive. Parental match confirmed. Ricardo let out a sigh that had been trapped in his chest for years. His daughter Laura was alive. She had returned to him with a different name, with an unknown history, but she was still her. He didn't wait to share the news with Sophia. He found her in the park, where it had all begun. Seeing him arrive, Sophia knew he had answers, and her heart raced with a mix of anxiety and hope. "Sophia, you are my daughter," Ricardo said, his voice breaking with emotion. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Sophia looked at him, her eyes filling with tears as she tried to process those words. "Really?" she asked in a whisper, as if she feared it was all a dream. Ricardo nodded, unable to hold back his tears. "You are Lara. My Lara." Sophia felt her world turn upside down. She had lived for years with unanswered questions, and now suddenly she had a father, a past, and a name she never imagined. At home, Mariana heard the news with a mixture of relief and sadness. She knew this moment would come, that the truth would come out, but she feared what it would mean for her. For years, she had been Sophia's mother, and now she was faced with the possibility of losing her. However, Ricardo did not let those fears grow. After talking to Sophia, he went to see Mariana. "I don't want to take you out of her life," Ricardo said sincerely. "I know what you've done for her, how much you love her. I want you to remain a part of our family." Mariana, although relieved, couldn't help but get emotional. She had feared that this moment would separate her from Sophia, but Ricardo's words brought her back a peace of mind she hadn't expected. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments. Ricardo and Sophia began to rebuild their relationship, exploring memories of a life they had briefly shared before being separated. Sophia, though initially torn between two worlds, found solace in the presence of Ricardo and Mariana. "Hello, Sophia," Ricardo greeted in a voice that tried to be calm. She nodded, unable to answer. Ricardo took a moment before continuing. "I know this must be very confusing for you. I don't want to hurt you, but I think we might have a connection. Something important." Sophia felt her throat close up. Ricardo's words were full of sincerity, but they were also overwhelming. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked in a tone that was a mix of distrust and curiosity. Ricardo took a deep breath before answering. "I just want to know the truth. There is a way to confirm it, but the decision is yours." Sophia looked at him with narrowed eyes. "As? A DNA test," Ricardo replied, keeping his gaze fixed on her. "If you agree, we can do the test and confirm if you are my daughter, but I'm not going to force you. This is completely up to you." Sophia felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. The proposal was direct, almost cold, but behind those words was a promise of answers that could change everything. "What if I'm not who you think I am?" he asked quietly. "Then at least we'll know the truth, and we'll both be able to move on," Ricardo replied with a calm that hid his anxiety. "But if it turns out that you are, I want you to know that Mariana's small apartment was soon filled with laughter, conversation, and new promises. The family that none of them expected to form began to take shape, uniting their stories under the roof of love and resilience. One afternoon, while they were walking together in the park, Sophia stopped and looked at Ricardo. "Thank you for not giving up," he said with a smile that lit up his face. Ricardo hugged her, feeling all the wounds of the last 15 years begin to heal. "I would never do that, Lara," he replied with an emotion that needed no words. The past that had separated them so much now united them in a future full of hope. Although there were still challenges to face, they were together, and that for them was enough. Ricardo's story reminds us to never give up when it comes to those we love, even if the path is full of uncertainties and obstacles. Sometimes the answers we seek not only heal old wounds, but also lead us to form new bonds and rebuild our lives from love and resilience. What about you? What would you have done in his place? Would you have kept searching or let time bury the unanswered questions? Click on the video that appears on the screen to continue this journey of self-discovery and discover stories as profound as this one. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next videos full of emotion and inspiration. See you in the next one.